words. It's about movements of action or a situation. So I don't necessarily think, it has to necessarily be a writer's domain. Usually it's about a certain time. You have 60 minutes to tell something, or half an hour to say something. Often words are much more economical to move the story forward, rather than people moving around. It takes a lot of effort to get to A to B. So, but I think with me, with Sports, what we did was slightly different in the sense of having a set sort of situation where it didn't have to be 60 minutes. It could be 2 hours. It could be whatever. So we had time to do what we wanted. So I don't necessarily think now. I think people also are educated in a way they wasn't necessarily before, looking at film or TV, because it gets just so much of it. So therefore, people are so much more sophisticated to sort of look at how a narrative pans out. So no, I don't necessarily think it's about how you tell a story. Two people are telling you the same story. One bores you to tears. One you're sitting on the edge of your seat. How you do that, it's up to you. As long as you get people, hopefully, sitting at the edge of their seat and wanting more. So not necessarily in writer's medium. No, I don't think so.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, Lucy, how about you? I mean, as Steve mentioned, I mean, TV itself is kind of changing underneath us all anyway. Lengths and kind of formats are kind of breaking down a little bit. Steve says he doesn't think there's anything unique about the relationship between TV and writers. How about you?
Well, I think...
Don't put words in my mouth. It's just little sound bites now. No, don't do that. But please answer. I apologise, interrupting you.
No, not at all. I think that... when I first started in TV, it was much more of a situation where you hand your script over to a producer, or that's what it felt like to me. And then someone directs it and some actors do it. And you're kind of a stage in the relay race of creating a piece of television. And that didn't really work for me. So my sort of attitude to it is different, or maybe just unhealthily controlling, but I like to sort of go through every stage of it, which actually came more from theatre for me. Like in theatre, it's completely expected that if you write a play, you'll be in the auditions, for all of the casting of it and stuff like that, and you'll be in at least some of the rehearsals, probably most of the rehearsals. And I feel like now in TV, it's interesting, my job, what I do, and everyone's different, isn't just being a writer. And it's interesting what Steve says about that being sort of the written word or the script. I like to, or when I can, oversee in a more show running way, which means things like casting, which means things like being on set, which means things like edit, stuff like that. And so in a way, I'd say it's more than a writer's medium now, like as in the job that you do or the job that is available to you is bigger than that. And it might not be what you want to like. So I think there are writers out there who do want to write screenplays and have other people direct them and sort of join the process later, but that's not me.
Thank you, Lucy. I mean, we'll have writers with us tonight, of course, lots of writers who are probably hard at work on scripts, doing the whole blood, sweat and tears thing. I mean, to give them some context and maybe some hope as well. I mean, purely as writers, how long were your creative journeys with I Hate Suzie and Small Axe? Lucy, I'll come to you first.
Oh, ages. I mean, so it's a show that I created with my friend Billy Piper, who stars in it. And we started talking about it. It really was a conversation that Billy said, I think we should do a show together. I think you should write something and I should be in it. And that was maybe 2016, something like that. And it took me a while to come around to it, to find the initial idea. Like that, I needed to find what the show was about. And then I did so many drafts of the first episode, which is something I often do. I mean, I'm talking like 30 quite distinct drafts, as in there was a number of different shows there and it could have been any of them, but I needed to write the pilot over and over again to try and find what it was. And then it took a while actually to try to get it made. We sort of rather arrogantly thought that people would want it. And there was, there was some of that, but there wasn't a lot of it. And that was partly because we were coming with something we wanted to make ourselves and then try and sell it. And actually, there are a lot of people out there in TV whose job it is to develop and just to make things. It's not sometimes as good a position to be in to turn up with something you've already half written. So that was, so that took a long, long time. 5 years. Yeah.
Steve, how about for you? I mean, I've seen 11 years mentioned, but as we've already found out tonight, journalists do tend to get their facts wrong and misquote people. So let me double check that with you.
That's accurate. Oh my goodness. it just took a while. It was, it was a want, a must, and a need at the end of the day. But the initial idea happened when I just wanted to turn the sort of the lens on the West Indian Black community in London, the generations. Because at that time there was a lot of people who were passing. Oh my goodness! If I don't, because the West Indian community is it's a very sort of, it's family. It's all about family. So, when I grew up, it was all marriages. It was all people getting married, and it was christenings. And then, of course, there's a big jump, and then it's all funerals. It's like, oh, where are these people, the traditions, what's happened? So I had to get it on paper. I had to sort of get it down. So at first, I thought it would be a fictional situation. Then I thought, no, this is going to be real, true story. Somehow these, doing the research on wanting to do something, and we said, well, these are the incredible stories. Why am I doing fictionalizing this? And then said about getting a writer's room. So we had a writer's room on Small Axe originally. And that was sort of, we went for a good few months with that. And in that writer's room was Alistair Siddons, and Courtier Newton, who was the two writers that I worked with on Small Axe, as well as Alex Wheatle, who was part of the writer's room. And what happened with him is that he didn't want to, because what happened, we emptied all our handbags on the table. And then he told his story. I thought, my goodness, this is actually incredible, your story. But he didn't want to tell it. So what happened was that Alistair and myself jumped on board and sort of, with his help, of course, helped to write his story. And then Courtier, I worked with Red, White and Blue and Lovers Rock. So, I'm dyslexic. So how I write is I dictate a lot. So what I do is again, I get someone to sort of dictate and listen back, and it's like listening. It's like, for me, it's all oral. And I write sometimes because the person's not there, so I write or record on my phone, and then I write it down. So it's one of those things which is sort of a patchwork of things, images. And I say, okay, and I got it. Because if I listen to something, I can see it, and I can hear it. When I listen to something, I can hear if it's wrong or right or not. It's like music in a way, language or writing. I'm going on a bit, but anyway, I'll stop. I'll land the aircraft. So what happened was that's what happened, and we started to get going. But the writers' room was this place where we could throw ideas about. Then it just happened to be these two writers, which were the sort of two which I wanted to continue with, and they were Alistair Siddons and Courtier.
And I'm curious for both of you, how much of those first thoughts, those initial sort of drafts for you, Lucy, and I guess Steve, for you, those initial conversations with writers, how much of that ended up on screen? How much of that survived the entire creative process? And how much of it, so if we're watching I Hate Suzie, or we're watching Small Axe now, how much of those initial conversations and those initial thoughts are still up there?
A lot for me, because it was like, it was the first time people had a chance to say things. Talk about smell and food and things that we never saw before on British film or British television, and things that we knew instinctively about but hadn't been given a platform. Our intimacies, our unique sort of things of how one does things. Now can we put them on the screen, and it can become universal. That's the thing that was interesting about me. There was a real rush to put things on screen, and a need, and it's also part of our history, British history, which hasn't been given this kind of platform before, because we weren't wanted. But that's another story. We'll talk about that later. Sorry,
Lucy. How about you?
Yeah, well, there's an overlap there that's interesting with what Steve just said. That I think the things that really survived were the things that we put up on a. There was one sort of board that we put up on the wall when me and Billy were coming up with stuff, and its title was "Things You Always See in Life But You Never See on TV." And we would just list things from our experience, or from life, or the stories we'd tell, or just like where you sort of, and almost all of those things made it in, because our kind of ethos for it was no telly, by which we meant nothing that you really, really recognize as being a trope of television that you very, very rarely experience. And that was a sort of guiding principle, really. And it's a bit brutal, because, Billy would something, because I would do these drafts and I would write these scripts, and very occasionally Billy would put, a note in the margin and go, telly, ? And she was always right. You know, the instinct was sort of like, yeah, that's a cheat that I'm doing as a writer to get somewhere I know we need to go. But actually, it's bullshit. And I think that that was a really good practice.
I mean, Lucy, you've talked a little bit about your kind of, your professional relationship with Billy and your friendship as well. You're very good friends in real life. I'm curious as to whether that made it easier to find the voice, of Suzie, or does friendship also sort of throw up risks and complications?
Yeah, it's really double-sided, or at least actually it was much better than I feared. I went into it quite cautious, going, Billy, this is really dangerous. And she, in typical Billy fashion, went very headstrong into it, going, no, this will be fine. And annoyingly as ever, she was right. Like, it was pretty good and fine and easy. But there were elements, it's hard to compromise. I'm used to kind of, doing the work that I want to do as a writer and as an author. And if there is conflict, normally that's easy with a colleague. If it's someone you care very, very deeply about and you're very enmeshed with, that conflict can feel incredibly difficult, because you're like, oh God, I don't want to lose a friend, but I really feel like I know what's right here. But actually that happened far less than I thought it would. And when it did happen, we were pretty good at talking it through. And so I was relieved by that. And there are ways in which it's so much easier. Like, there were these lovely moments where, because we know each other so well, I'd come up to her on set after a take sometimes and just go, it's and she'd go, oh yeah. And then she'd just go into another take. And it's like, I only said it. And then I'd look and you'd go, yeah, because your form of communication becomes incredibly short, which helps the work be better, because you literally take less time to get where you need to go.
And during that writing process, I'm curious as to how practically you were working with Billy, how closely you were working with it. I mean, Steve mentioned small acts coming out of conversations, coming out of kind of verbal collaborations. That's where the ideas came from. Was that true for you as well? I mean, are you sending each other ideas? Are you texting? Are you WhatsApping? Or is this you getting a draft together and then having a conversation? Something more.
It was an order of, we spent some time in a room together, like about a month. We spent, 3 days a week in a room together for that month, coming up with stuff, putting stuff all over the walls. And then I sort of went away and wrote the scripts. And sometimes stuff from the room was very much there. And sometimes I'd come back with something completely different for a whole episode, because I'd worked out that it didn't work. And that's what I felt my job was to do. And then Billy would sort of like note the scripts and say, here's what I think about this, here's what I think about that. And then I would go away and write, and again, either do something different or often kind of her instinct was really right. Actors' instincts are nearly always right. At least their instinct about there being a problem is almost always right. And then sometimes it's the writer's job to find a solution.
Steve, I mean, you've touched on your use of images already, and I really wanted to dig more into that. I mean, one of the things we know you as this extraordinary visual filmmaker. I mean, every single one of your films, I was going to say every single Small Axe film, is true of your whole body of work. I mean, there are images there which are unshakable. So I think of Mangrove, and I still think of the colander, and you holding that shot and holding that shot and holding that shot. As a writer, I mean, I wonder how much of those kind of images are already in your mind at script stage, or is that something which happens when the camera is there?
I think how you write, I don't know how, I don't know, again, it's about, for me, it's about instinct, what works, what doesn't work, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. To take, again, a lot of the stuff also, you just take words out. You change the scene because you're in the trajectory anyway. Why do I need that? It's obvious. Or allowing things to happen. Again, how you write things. I think that's what I mean by TV and writers. And it's what works and what feels right and what it wants to. What the project, what the film wants it to be. It will tell you what it wants to be. But you've got to be sensitive enough to allow it to be that thing it wants it to be. That's the force. That's the power of something. I think that's how it translates. People are very, again, they're very sophisticated. They see if something is stiff or forced or whatever. So if you could give over to the actual process, and the process is of course, it's the words that one writes, the structure that you have, but also allowing things to sort of come into it and take over. Because like Love Is Rock, there was a lot of dialogue that was just cut. There was a lot of dialogue that was cut because what happened was that the thing took over. And also, in a moment, when you got a moment with John Boyega doing something, well, hey, that says it. Cut. Let's move on. So it's about it's about the power of the piece as it occurs, and that's it. You know, the best idea wins. I don't know. I'm not precious about that.
And each of the films is one piece, but it's also obviously part of a larger whole as well. I mean, Small Axe it's a suite of stories. They're kind of independent of each other, but they're also deeply interconnected. I mean,
Yeah.
I wonder how much you were thinking, how much could you think of any of the films individually when you were writing them and bringing them together without thinking of the other four as well?
Because they all related to each other. Because again, you could think of them individually, but there's a time you got from '68 to you know, you got '73, you got 80, 83. You know, 81, you know, so you've got this trajectory, but also you have what's going on, you know, with, you know, policing, what's going on with, you know, what's in courtrooms, and it goes, you could go back and forth. You could go to Red, White and Blue, and you see this fake court at the Hendon Police Training Center. And the fact that his father never gets to be in court, but then you get in, you know, he never has his day in court. But then you get in the first one, Mangrove, this huge, massive show trial in, you know, the highest court in the land at the Old Bailey. You know, they've been prosecuted for, you know, a riot and a fray, you know, for a demonstration coming out from a cafe. You know, Old Bailey reserved for terrorists and high treason. You know, and murder. And they've been tried in that court. So again, you see all the sort of dots of lawmaking and stuff like that. I mean, it's all there. You can talk about food. You can talk about all kinds of things which are a little bit more sort of, you know, local, and things which are a little bit obviously about the rule of the land. So it's all there. Intimacy and the formal situations.
And Lucy, how about you? I mean, how do you feel about kind of each individual episode of I Hate Suzie in relation to kind of, you know, the eight episodes? Are you thinking of them as standalone pieces, or do you have to watch all episodes in the order that they first went out to properly appreciate this?
Well, it's interesting. The 8 episodes of I Hate Suzie all have a different title, a different emotional title. They're a different stage of trauma, each of them, and they each have a different style in terms of how they're shot and of how they're written. And it's interesting to me that this year does celebrate a lot of work that feels, I mean, obviously Steve's films, I think, you know, Michaela Cole's, you know, incredible I May Destroy You has a similar feeling to it in terms of some of the episodes feel very self-enclosed and like they're sort of artistic works of their own. And that's certainly something we endeavored to do with I Hate Suzie. And it's just interesting to me that that's happened. And I think it's something to do with television at the moment. I think it's something to do with online life, where people are very used to consuming things in discrete packages. I mean, not to be a twat about it, but like you know, yes, Twitter, but also just how you visit web pages. You know, that you move through life with quite strong experiences that are singular from each other, but they're bonded together on a screen, or how you move through them. And there's something about that in storytelling terms that I think is reaching television, or that film and television are combining in a way that they're being forced to do, because the only things in cinemas now, you know, are the massive Marvel movies and stuff. So I don't know what it is, but I think it's notable. And yeah, I think they do stand alone. I think they all feel different in Suzie, and I feel quite proud of that. I think people are a bit used to a kind of narrative where you're feeling like you know where it's going all the time, because people watch so much television now, almost like you can sing along to it. And sometimes there's a pleasure in that, you know, shows that do that really, really well. But I think sometimes it begins to feel a bit like, yeah, I know what this is now. I'll move on to another show.
So a question for both of you in that case, I mean, how important is the chronology? You know, how important is for you, Lucy, 1 to 8? And Steve, for you, I mean, you know, you mentioned the historical settings of the stories, but you're jumping about through time, actually. I mean, you don't start in one part of the chronology and then move through the timeline. I mean, actually, your order, I mean, you clearly gave a lot of thought to how these 5 films were going to be.
You know, having things in order is not a bad thing. I mean, you know, if I jumped into the middle of a series, I wouldn't even know what to start, because, you know, you've got to see the first one and the second and third one, and so you can't just jump into 3 or 4 without, because it could be shot differently, look differently, but I wouldn't even know where the hell I am. So that's fine. That's great. I mean, the fact you guys saying in chronological order is fine. I mean, Small Axe, I did it. It's like but mine is like songs. You know, and then, you know, you got the album, but you could go from that, but you don't have to necessarily do that. You could jump to 3 and 4 and go to 5. You know, that's just how we did it. Doesn't make it better. It's just different. That's it. So, you know, I like the idea of people seeing it in order that I put in, but if they don't want to, that's fine. That's just that's not a problem, and they won't get lost. in it at all. I mean, it's like a Rubik cube. You go back and forth, you can see the connections between each individual one. But if something is done in chronological order, that's fine. I mean, that's brilliant. It doesn't bother me. But it's not about sort of mucking it up. You have to sort of, in order to follow the narrative, you have to go for 1, 2, 3, 4. That's just how it is. I mean, it's not a problem.
And Lucy, how about you? Because obviously, as you say, I mean, the viewer has the power now, because obviously episodes will drop at once and then it's over to them. So you don't have that sense of things dropping in kind of neat weekly segments that you used to have.
No, although some shows are deliberately doing that. You can see recently that obviously Line of Duty has been unbelievably, incredibly popular, and that has something to do with the event television mold coming back. So yeah, I feel, for me, I wanted to do I Hate Suzie in emotional stages or in thematics. So the last episode, Acceptance, has a structure with a voiceover in it, and none of the rest of the show has a voiceover in it, very specifically for the reason that thematically Acceptance is about looking at one's own life, building an interior monologue, having perspective on it. So it's shot like so I was just interested in, can you make theme and emotion the driver of an episode rather than chronology, time, or character? And that's sort of what the show was trying to explore. But I also think that viewers don't actually want they don't want so much choice that they're creating the show themselves. The whole point, what art is a series of decisions, and or at least creating a piece of work is a series of decisions. And if you're not going to make those decisions as an artist, I think eventually audiences are going to be quite annoyed, because they may as well be doing it themselves. If you're going to be like, oh, you can watch these in any order and that's what's cool about it, at some point audiences, if that was the everything of everything, would be like, well, what do your job, make choices on my behalf eventually.
Steve, I just want to go back and pick up something you mentioned kind of at the top of the conversation. You were talking about Alex Wheatle and those first conversations you had. And obviously the whole of Small Axe is filled with real people stories. Alex Wheatle, Leroy Logan, the Critchlow family. I mean, does that bring, as a writer and as a creator, does that bring a responsibility?
Yes, and yes and no, I'll be honest, because, it's not just about pandering to people, it's about trying to get to some sort of honesty, and you want to do it justice, but at the same time you have to make certain decisions. I mean, Leroy Logan, the Red, White and Blue, was very difficult. It was very difficult because, to be honest, at first I didn't really understand Leroy and his decision. I mean, not for people who haven't seen it already, but he chose to be in the police force at the time, and what happened to his family or a member, it was very difficult for me to understand why he wanted to join that regime. And with myself and Courtier, we did a lot of talking to Leroy and among ourselves to sort of get to some kind of idea on how to approach it. And he's a cop, so he doesn't give much. He's a cop. You could interrogate. We were playing good cop and bad cop, myself and Courtier, with him. But maybe Courtier, most probably, because he wasn't. Maybe Courtier got an eyebrow raise out of him or whatever. But to chisel away to get to somewhere, it was very difficult. And how we got through is through his relationship with his father. So yeah, that was our in as such. So yeah, no, I think you can't have. I do definitely take care, but at the same time, you've got to have your viewpoint. You've got to have your opinion. You've got to find it. In fact, not come with a stencil immediately. Find it through the process of research and writing, basically.
And I'm curious about that moment in that case where you must have, presumably you showed Red, White and Blue to Leroy Logan. I wonder how you felt about his response to that. I remember interviewing the documentary maker, Albert Maysles, and him saying, I want to make a film that the subject is happy with. And that always stayed with me, because I thought, well, should you do that? I don't know. How did you feel about that? Do you want Leroy Logan to be happy when he watches Red, White and Blue, or happy at least with your portrayal of him?
I'd be silly to say I didn't want him to be happy, for sure. I wouldn't want to be bloody annoyed, that's for sure. But at the same time, you go with that risk. I went with that risk with all the films to a certain extent. But yes, he was very happy about it. I think the black community saw him in a way they never saw him before, through Red, White and Blue. I think that movie changed perceptions on him in a big way. Absolutely. I mean, that's the power of television, that's the power of film, that they can actually do that. People sort of understood what he was trying to do more because of that picture than they ever did. Yeah, it's a strange one.
Lucy, let me bring you back in. I mean, I'd like to kind of widen the conversation into the industry. I mean, it feels like I Hate Suzie is kind of always pulling back the veil on how the industry, the entertainment industry really works. I mean, how important was that to you? And at this stage, is there anywhere that you still wouldn't go, or are all bets off in terms of kind of exposing the industry?
Yeah, I definitely didn't think of it in those terms. As in, it wasn't an aim of the show to be satirical or attacking of the industry. It was more that I felt I knew what the show would be if I did it in the obvious way. Like, I thought, I can see that there's a version of I Hate Suzie which is sort of about an actress, and it's about celebrity life in the way we normally see that on TV. And it's sort of a bit glittery, and but it's sort of people poking fun at themselves in a very knowing way. Like, there's a version of I Hate Suzie where you have like real life actors in it playing themselves, sending themselves up in a kind of extras way or something. And I was keen not to go in that direction, and that it should be very, very personal and emotional and quite interior. It's really about her mental state most of the time, and that's why the shots are so close, and that's why there's so much kind of loud music. You know, it's very interior. So that wasn't the way that I thought of it. If the industry comes off badly, as in the industry that we work in comes off badly within it, then I don't think that's totally surprising. But it wasn't a sneering aim. It's just the world that she happens to be in. And nothing's for me, nothing's ever off limits though in that way. Like we were saying earlier, it just always has to be something that I haven't seen before and I think is true.
It's funny you say that, actually, because every woman I know has told me that they saw something of themselves in I Hate Suzie and something that they hadn't seen on TV before.
That's really thrilling. Thank you.
Well, I was curious about your experience of the response among women and what women have told you about watching the show.
Yeah, I've had some really quite moving. It's funny. It's never the shows you think. Like, I always thought this show, I was always skin of the teeth with this one. Like, I was always thinking, oh God, this is a nightmare. It's going to be so difficult. It's really difficult schedule, difficult budget, like really, 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 it's going to be really hard. And we're only just going to get away with it. And it's actually the one that I've had the most emotional outpouring from people. And I can never tell. My judgment on these things is obviously terrible. But yeah, with women, it's been a lot of, oh my God, yes, that's exactly right. And thank you. And the one thing I'm pleased with about that is because I think there's a lot of writing women in a way that feels like we're being nice about women and horrible about men. Like, as in, I think there's a stage that we went through that was that we thought was a form of feminism, you know, that we sort of represent ourselves as great and you know, other people as not great. And I think that's really misguided artistically. And I think the thing I'm proud of about Suzie is it feels like writing a woman with the nuance and depth and flaws that are as interesting as the men that get written for screen with those things. And that is what is important, is that the flaws are as tragic. They're just very specific. I think Suzie couldn't be a male character, if you see what I mean. Like, her fatal flaw is to be absolutely obsessed with what other people are thinking about her. And I'm not saying men can't be any of these things. What I'm saying is that it's a specifically female quality that I think Suzie represents, to do with porousness of self and manipulation and passive aggression, that I think a lot of women understood and appreciated being represented in a way that felt, like men are all the time with their sort of flaws.
And I mean, is it in that case a kind of a positive in itself that the industry is finding room for those stories now? Does that feel like, you know, that the industry must be improving in some ways because there is space for those stories now?
Yeah, but let's not give the industry too much credit. There's just literally more space. Like, there's literally more bandwidth. That's literally what's happening. So, it's brilliant and great that bandwidth is being filled as it rightly should be by people who might not have had those opportunities before, and characters that we might not have seen before. But that's also, they need us to do that. And I think that's great that we can.
Steve, I mean, to bring you back in, I mean, again, Small Axe is filled with astonishing things from start to finish. One of them felt like it was the very fact that these films were going out on BBC One on a Sunday evening, which I think, if you're of a certain generation, it's this very traditional, meaningful place in the schedule. I mean, how important was that slot, that Sunday night BBC One slot for you? Did it matter?
Yeah, that was the sort of the idea from right at the beginning, that I wanted my mum to sort of switch the TV on and see something that she sort of would enjoy or would sort of take interest in, and had something that she could identify with on television, and also the fact that it went through the bloodstream of the country. The BBC could reach any and everywhere. It's available to any and everyone in the country. So that was a huge attraction. And that was it, really. Again, it's just showing stories that, and again, black people in this country, as far as the film and TV industry, were never welcome, were never wanted. But hence, the sort of ambition to fill that gap from that period of time until the early 80s with these stories. That was the ambition, to put into the canon these stories which had not been sort of given the air or been seen before. And it's showing Britain in a way that is what is a blues party? What is a shebeen in Labrador, Notting Hill, in 1980? What is that? What is a working class black family whose children are doing very well? Why does one of them doesn't want to be a research chemist and goes into the police? For what reason? And XYZ and education and so forth. So again, it's about those everyday stories, these sort of these heroes, which they don't have capes, but at the same time, you might walk past them in the street. So therefore, to have that being beamed out into the country was very important to me. BBC had to be on the BBC for sure.
And how aware, in that case, were you of the response? Certainly on the BBC, where the films are going out week by week, because those films last autumn were kind of blowing people's minds. You live in Amsterdam these days. I wonder, were you following that? I mean, or do you just make the work and you put the work out there and then you leave the rest to happen?
No, I've been very fortunate with my work. I've debuted in Cannes and Toronto, Telluride, Venice, bloody blah. I've done it. In that way, I'm very blessed. I never forget to know that. But putting those things out on television and seeing the reaction, I've never had an experience like that before, ever in my life. It was traumatic every bloody Sunday night debuting, because I think Lucy will tell you, you are in people's homes. You have been invited because they've chosen you. They said they've opened doors. They come in. I'll sit down. I'll make a cup of tea. That's what they've done. That's what the viewers have done. So the fact that they invite you in is that you're in. Now, how do you stay in without being kicked out? And the fact that you don't get kicked out, and the fact that they sort of are giving you some sort of response, an emotional response. I mean, again, I think what Lucy was saying, in some ways of the unseen being seen. It's hugely emotional. So when people see themselves on the screen for the first time, and it's hugely sort of how can I say? It's like a cascade of tears and emotion, and therefore, yeah, it was crazy. It was. I've never had an experience like that ever, debuting anywhere in the world. It's just incredible. Yeah.
And I wonder, in that case, how much was there trepidation? I wonder emotionally what was going on in your mind before Mangrove went out as the first of the films on BBC One. This is this huge creative journey for you, but there's also, as you say, there's all manner of other stuff on your shoulders as well. Is that a nervous moment or just an exhilarating moment, a wonderful moment?
Listen, once we won when we actually got to make them. And they were broadcast, because I was even up until the broadcast. I thought, oh, it's going to screw it up, because I was talking to the geeks at the BBC to transmit. What do you mean? How's it going to look like? What's the one going to look like? Because you never, it's like a premiere in a movie in film festival. You think the real thing. I mean, they do digitally, and now, of course, it's all kind of good. But in my day, there was a lot of nerves. There was a lot of nerves before it went out, and so that was good. It was just wonderful. And also to have that. To share it with so many people, it was incredible.
I wanted to ask you both a question, actually, which was about the legacy of both the projects. Whether they were going to be these catalysts. I mean, do you, for each of you, do you want there to be? I was going to say young people. It doesn't matter; their age is immaterial. Do you want there to be people out there, writers, creators, who go on and make work kind of because of I Hate Suzie, because of Small Axe? Again, does that matter to you?
I want people to make work because they have the opportunity to. You know, that's it. You know, not because of I don't know. I'll let Lucy talk, but not because of small acts, not because of me, because they can. You know, and that's the problem. That question I feel is the problem, because you think, okay, they did it. Now everyone's going. No, that's not. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But anyway, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. Like, you don't. I think people are really touched and moved by something when they haven't seen something quite like it before. So I think it's a dodgy place to start to sort of want to be influential or to want to be influenced either way. I think it's more an emotional thing of going, I think when you write something, there's so much of you that's going in quite a childlike way. Is it just me? And that's the gesture. And I think when it's received by people going, no, it's not just you. Yes, God, yes, me too. That sort of completes the gesture, and it feels incredibly like moving and exciting and great. And it's that I'd like to think that, you know, when you're a bit vulnerable in a script, and I know when it is, I can sometimes see it in other writers writing as well, when there's what I call blood on the page, where you feel like somebody's really going, is pushing something that they care a lot about and that costs them something to write. You can feel it, and that is what I would hope, and you know, just think, oh, it'd be lovely to think that a younger writer might feel that they can do that because they've been on the other end, they've been on the receiving end of that from my work.
And in terms of, you know, because I actually think, you know, with both your projects, that will be happening. There will be people out there who are inspired, you know, and are now writing because of it. But is it important to keep the pressure on the industry? I mean, Lucy, you mentioned the risk of complacency with the industry earlier. I mean, is there a sense that the industry will look at something like Small Act and say, okay, job done, we made Small Acts, now we can go back to doing exactly what we did before? Does the pressure need to be kept on?
Yeah, go on, Steve, sorry.
Please go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna, I don't, pressure being put on, I don't know, even the metaphor feels like it's the responsibility of people who are really, really good artists to sort of get to keep convincing people to politically stage them, which is not how I see it. I see it as there's a lot of people out, they need the artistic work that is really, really good and original and will feel fresher than some other artistic work, potentially, not always, and that will be a centerpiece going forward, because a lot of people are watching a lot of television. That's how I feel about it. Of course, I think there needs to be constant reminder that behind the scenes, it does feel like there's still a lot of the similar sort of people in charge with similar tastes who might not be as self-questioning as they should be, and that there's a lot of pressure to do things in front of the camera that actually aren't happening behind the camera. But that's a bigger conversation, maybe for a different time. And
I think with these shows, which we're all a part of, and you know, and others, I mean, they've been extremely successful. You know, not just locally but globally. So what pressure? What pressure is it to bring something excellent to the table? People want these stories, and they've been tried and proven and tested. There you go. Yeah. I mean, you know, end of.
Before we go to audience questions, I mean, I wanted to ask you about 2020, which we still feel like we're in somehow, although it's 2021 now. I mean, both your projects came out last summer and last autumn, in the year of George Floyd, in the year of COVID. After all the time that you spent putting these stories together, you know, we spoke at the top about the length of time that the projects took. Are you glad that they came out in the very particular moment that they did?
Someone asked me that again today. Well, for me, it was a very painful situation. I rather, you know, if you were talking about joy as George Floyd, I'd rather George Floyd be alive today than dead. And you know, it is what it is. The story continues. So, you know, I don't know what to say to that, really. I mean, yeah.
Lucy, how about you? I mean, 2020 it felt like the end of the world in so many ways. At the same time, I mean, I've spoken to kind of to TV and filmmakers who said they had this literal captive audience, and it was a chance to kind of say anything they wanted to people who they wouldn't have otherwise reached. Did you see 2020 as an opportunity in some ways?
No, I think like everyone else, I experienced it as quite a trauma. And I think it was, you know, I tell you, I think practically speaking, I was incredibly grateful that we'd managed to shoot all of Suzie, which we did a month before the pandemic started. So we did all of our post in our separate houses, which was in our little spaces, which was really difficult, because when you're doing post, you're doing sound, you're doing, you know, editing, you're doing all sorts of stuff that's much better achieved in studios designed for that fact rather than people's houses. So there were elements where you're just technically working on something going, oh, I can tell, I can hear that that's not, you know, in a restaurant, I can hear that that's faked. So there was some stuff that was frustrating, but in a way I just felt so grateful that we'd shot it all and everything else was achievable. So I was just lucky. There were a lot of people I knew who did, you know, who were halfway through something or just started something and they didn't get to achieve it. And you know, just from a professional industry perspective. But yeah, other than that, it was it's hard to it's hard to feel much worse than the pandemic made one feel. It's hard to emotionally compete with that, is what I'm saying.
Sure. Listen, we've got audience questions going to come in, and so I'm going to go to the first of those, which is from Erica James. She says, as a young Black woman screenwriter and filmmaker, I was impacted by both Small Axe and I Hate Suzie. Both were transformative bodies of work. Do you have any advice for new writers and filmmakers in terms of having your work recognised and standing by your authentic voice in your work? And that will be a question for both of you, I guess.
Yeah, yes, definitely. You know, keep it authentic. I mean, you know, again, I think we kept it as authentic as you possibly could. The beautiful thing about the whole idea of this word authenticity or whatever it is, I don't know, whatever, you know, is the stuff. It's the stuff which is underneath your nose. You know, we're always projecting, always looking elsewhere, and it's like it's right there. You know, so to keep it, you know, I think there's nothing what you could say or what you can't that you could do that will not be recognized. And I that's the thing that surprised me about Small Axe. Certain things which which are very sort of, you know, intimate or local or, you know, private, had so much resonance to, you know, so many people. So definitely do that. But also it's to do with how do you get your script, how do you get seen? You know, okay, you're doing that, how do you get it to that person, how do you get it to that person? I think you just knock on every bloody door, and be a nuisance. Be a nuisance and knock on every door. And, you know, try to get people, you know, to read your stuff. That's it. Yeah, that's what I could say about that, really.
Yeah, I would add to that practically and say that I think finishing something, you know, so yes, keep your voice authentic, but it's surprising to me how few writers will finish something, because either you can lose confidence, you know, partway through it, or they'll always be sort of working on it but never finishing it. And honestly, if you have a voice and you're passionate and you take the time to look at structure and to look at form, just out of interest, just out of passion and interest, and you finish something, you're actually in like the sort of last 10% at that stage. So you're getting into a place where if you can then get people to look at it, and then I would also say, have people you respect look at it, do rewrites based on that, and then send that to someone who you really, really think might be able to help you. Because I think the other mistake that sometimes less experienced writers might make is just sort of sending stuff out to type at quite a top level very, very early and quickly, when maybe they'll only read it once for you. Like, so you know, I think there's also a world where you finish it, you send it to a few people you respect, you do a rewrite based on that, and then you send it, can sometimes just be a practical thing that I think can help a bit. Was my experience.
And I just like I think that's great what you just said, actually. And I also think that sometimes finishing it is staying with it, because sometimes you want to give up or you want to, and sometimes, you know, 24 hours can make a huge difference to a script. Just be thinking, you want to check it out, you know, it's hard work. It's just hard work. It's WORK. It's just hard work.
Yeah, and it is for everyone, isn't it, Steve? Like, as in, I feel like, you know, don't. It's hard for everyone to do it, and you know, don't think that because it's taking you a number of drafts that doesn't mean you're a good writer. Like every good writer does a terrible draft. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, there will be a lot of writers with us tonight. I mean, you know, you guys, you cover all creative bases, so you can speak to this. I mean, no part of making work is going to be easy, but is writing the hardest part? I mean, is writing like the devil?
I love that question. I love that question so much, because I'm always going on about that. I'm always like, but writing's the hardest, isn't it? When we're talking to like directors or actors who do all three. I don't know. I like to think it is because I find it very hard. So I like to self-dramatize in the sense of going like, only the writers know how hard it is. But probably, truthfully, that's not the case.
I mean, yeah. I mean, for the first time, I've just. I mean, I didn't have a tennis partner, so I've just finished 2 scripts on my own, and it was. Sometimes it was easy-ish. Sometimes it was hard, but then the easy stuff, I'd go back. Oh God, no, that's it. Sometimes you have a stream of consciousness. Sometimes not. It's the first time I've just done these 2 scripts, and it's like it was. It's interesting to be alone and to be sort of and face with oneself and getting it down on paper, because I often feed off. It's like a painter. You got the sunflowers or bloody, you're vibing with the thing which is in front of you, even, but then you got a fucking piece of language. But then you got a screen and you got your key buddy board or whatever, and that's it. Or you got your assistant sort of dictating it, and it's like, and you're like, okay, pause. She's having a cup of tea. Like, oh, he's having a cup of tea. I'm like, okay. And I scribble. Okay, I got this. Okay, it's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy lifting, but very rewarding. Very extremely rewarding. Yeah.
Can I just jump in actually and ask you about that decision in that case to kind of go solo, Steve? You've talked about collaborating, with small acts. I mean, why become the lone writer now at this stage?
I think there's a lot of things which have happened recently, and again, you sort of you have ideas, and you sometimes just have to carry it by yourself over the finishing line. It's just one of those things where I had to do it. It's one of those things where I needed to sort of, and it wasn't a case of just challenging, because I don't know. People go, I wanted a challenge. What the fuck? What is that? I find that stuff crazy. Well, there has to be a reason to do it other than that it's hard. No. The reason why I wanted to do it was I felt I was the only one that could tell it, and that was it. And so often is the case that I love bouncing the ball with someone over a net, but this time I had to sort of, hopefully if it ever gets made, one will see why. That's it. It's like they're saying. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, listen, I'm going to go to another audience question. This one's from Andrew Lynch. Again, I think this is for both of you, really. But it's touching on what Lucy mentioned about staying involved in the project and as a writer, not handing it over. Do you have any advice on retaining creative involvement for screenwriters who are in the early stages of their careers? Because at that point, obviously, they're just excited about getting work made. So how important is it not to just hand things over?
Oh, that's so difficult because it depends so much on the people you're working with and the project. I would say it depends. I would say the rule with that is work with people who the vision is the same when you've met very early on. So one of the bigger mistakes I made was sometimes working on something I was really into, but in the very early meetings, the visions didn't quite match, but you would sort of go, oh yeah, but we but everyone's very nice and it'll be fine. And it's never fine. It's like if the visions aren't similar or the same actually from very early on, and I'm talking about directors and producers really here, it's so much work, and it never really has worked out for me, that. And I think a really good guide is trying to work with people where after you leave those early meetings, you're going, God, yeah, that's exactly how I see it too. That's exactly the references that I would use. And then when you hand something over, it feels very much like from an early point, you've all been sharing the same shape and the same vision, and it feels good. You're not caught out that you watch something and go, what is this? This is nothing like what I imagined. So I think the clues are often there quite early on, and you can be in denial about them or you can not. And that was important to me. And also, it's, of course, there are occasions where one wants to say things quite strongly, but I think also it's good to be around. I think when you're learning in the industry, and be nice to have around, because then people won't mind you being around, and you'll learn a lot more as well, because people, that. So of course there are times to make your point known and to be very strong and to stand by things. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying, be when you turn up, have it be like, oh great, they're here, that helps.
Steve, how about you? I mean, obviously, whether you're a writer or a director, whatever role you're playing, I mean, in those early stages of your career, there's often pressure, to fit yourself around other people's visions. So how do you navigate that?
Never did. Never did, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I never did. Never did. Never did. Never did. Never did. Thought that even like, you know, just no, never did. Never did. Never did. But that's why is that? Because fuck it. I just thought to myself, you know, I mean, when I made Hunger, I was like, might be the last move I ever made, but guess what? I'm gonna go out with 2 fucking guns blazing. And that was it. I never did. But it wasn't a case of being arrogant and anything like that, but just a case I knew what I wanted, and I know, you know, this is it. This is what I wanted. So, you know, I never did.
Do you have to be prepared to walk away?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I'm not gonna. I mean, you know, you only got one life. You know what I mean? I was like, no, yeah, absolutely. I would walk away. Well, you know, they've got something to lose too. You know, so guess what? You know, I know what I'm doing. You know, obviously you have no idea what you're doing, or you think you know what you're doing because someone else has done it before. You think that's the safest way to go, and my way isn't because you've never seen it before. But you know, hey, that's why I'm here. That's why I want to do what I want to do. So it's important. I mean, again, I can never. I just cannot. And I'm hoping that I can convince people. I hope I could talk to people, understand them to understand me, and come along with me and understand what I'm trying to do. And it's been very fortunate, you know. I did, you know, in that first picture, and that was it. So, you know, what's the point? You know, you got to die anyway, so just go out with 2 guns blazing. Because, you know.
Lucy, we've got a question for you from Jessica Mackie Hunter, who says, I love the decision to represent disability and to show the parents of a disabled child. What led you to that decision? What were the factors that played into it? In television and film, we don't often see disabled characters played by disabled actors, and I really loved that particular inclusion.
Oh, right. Is she?
Right.
Do you know what she's talking about? Is she talking? Oh, she's talking about Frank, the son. Okay, so Frank, played by a deaf actor called Matthew, who was wonderful. And yeah, very early on, I wanted the son to be deaf, but that came out of exactly the same emotional things as the one on the board about things you see in life that you never see on telly. And it was just simply that you see quite a lot of deaf people in life. I have a friend who's deaf, and I was talking to her about it, and I remember her saying that it was funny the amount of stuff she'd got away with as a kid, like how she would use the fact that she was deaf to get away with stuff. And I always found that very funny and charming and interesting. And like, oh right, you know, like she'd be caught stealing something, and she'd be like, oh no, and she would sign, and they would be like, oh God, I'm so sorry. And it was very interesting. I was like, you never see that. And so I was drawn to the idea of like, you know, the marriage in the show is quite unhealthy and has some unhealthy elements to it. And I knew that would affect the child in some way. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to not see it in the way that you would ordinarily see it? Like I could imagine what a show might do is like the parents are arguing a lot, so a child is behaving like this. And I thought, well, it'd be really interesting if the child's behavior was different, and I wondered why that might be different. And so it sort of it led to that, and thinking, and then and with stuff like that, it always just creates more creative ideas, because then I thought, well, how would they communicate with Frank? And I thought, I bet the dad would have learnt sign very, very well, because he would feel that was a sign, that was like an element of his own competence and relationship with his son. Whereas Susie would be would want him to lip read, because that would make him more normal, or, you know, be more like a hearing child, and so be able to make sense of things more in the world. But also from a laziness point of view, she would be like, oh, I don't want to learn sign, and that would be the truth underneath it. And then so for me then it became, there were character elements to this, and they would then have a disagreement between them about how they should communicate with their son, and that was a source of friction in their marriage. So any decision like that actually brings its own fruitful creative stuff with it, I think. And that was, yeah, that just all came out of that, really.
I mean, it always feels with representation, actually being authentic and being honest is always the best creative decision as well, because as you say, it sort of opens up all of these avenues. Whereas if you write people as saints, or as kind of, as demons, you know, these are very narrow portrayals. They don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and it's just, yeah, it's not true to life. And also, yeah, that's the thing, is that there's this terror that what representation means is like that. It's just represent something, and then, like, you know, but don't focus on it, and then just move on, so that we can say we have it. which I just think is so ugly and lazy and not true. It's that's not what people are talking about. People are talking about the fact that in the world there are lots of people who are deaf or have hearing issues. There's issues about cochlear implants, and whether or not to give your child one of them. It's all fascinating. It's all interesting. It's all human. It's not representation. It's a story you haven't told yet, and it's really, really more interesting. So it's just a different way of thinking than this idea of like, can we grab this and put it in to avoid criticism, which is not how it works. And it's the fact that it's written about that like that in journalism and in criticism and on social media is exhausting, because it isn't it.
We've got time for 2 more questions, I think, from the audience. So this one comes from Adam Walling. So it's aimed at Lucy, but actually I kind of want to spin it and ask Steve as well. The question says, for Lucy, the final episode of the show was such a satisfactory ending to a great series with its unexpected, unpredictable contradictions, and felt so true to the feeling of the narrative throughout. When you started writing, did you know the ending and the arc of the story of the character? How did that develop and become mapped out? So I'd love to find out about the last episode of I Hate Suzie, but Steve, I'd like to ask you the same question as well, because the endings of if you take Small Axe as the 5 standalones, every one of those films ends in a perfect place. I mean, Lovers Rock ends, I'm not going to spoil it for people, but it ends perfectly. For both of you, are the endings where you begin creatively and then you kind of, you write backwards?
Well, Lovers Rock was a fairy tale. I mean, as in it was about my aunt, who used to sort of tiptoe out of her house, or my uncle used to leave the back door open for her to go to blues parties because my grandmother would never allow her to go, and she used to climb or back in the house in the evening to get ready for church next morning. So that was always the narrative. So I had to be at the head and the tail, and then just working with the courtier to get the rest of it. I mean, going to the blues and stuff. Things were already there. So that was the very simple head and tail thing. Of course, a lot of the stories I knew how or actually where to end, like Red, White, and Blue. I could have ended it later, but that table, that getting to that precipice of these 2 men who get to a point in their lives where they can actually talk about the environment they were in, and they were fighting each other in, and they get to a point where they can actually have this dialogue. So I ended it there, in some ways, the middle of the story in a way, rather than to go on to see what happens they want to work on afterwards, because that is a point when both of them are at a point where they can actually look at each other, have the conversation about the environment they find themselves in, and how each one wanted to approach to deal how to deal with it. So yeah, I think when you're dealing with true stories as such, there's a head and there's a tail, as opposed to sort of having to invent a story or how you. But Lucy will put her angle on it.
Yeah, Lucy, how about you? I mean, you're working in fiction, so it's a different dynamic.
Yeah, it's a weird combination of knowing and not knowing. So the example I would give is that I always knew that Acceptance was the final episode. I always knew that it would be an episode with a voiceover, and that it would have a lot of flashbacks in it. That it would be her processing stuff and telling herself the story of what had happened. And I knew that, and that made me feel safe, because I had a bookend. I had Shock, episode 1, which would feel very explosive and raw and present tense, and Acceptance, which would be the total opposite, which would feel very distanced and perspective, and where we would move through time and be very slow and thoughtful. And when I had that as a bookend, I felt safe, and I felt like I could write the show in between. And I need that. I need a sense of containment. But when we first started shooting 8, we were shooting it, and I was watching the dailies, and I just had this moment, and I said, the last 10 minutes was wrong. The last 10 minutes is wrong. I know how to end it now. And I rewrote the last 8 to 10 pages. This is when we had started shooting, and I said, it needs to be this. It needs to be this. It's not what it was before. And all credit to particular Andrea Dewsbury, who's an incredible producer. They found the new locations. We changed the schedule, and we shot. We hadn't started shooting that bit yet, but it was a big endeavor to change all of those things. And so we shot I think writing at its best is your ability to keep that sense of certainty is what you want to do, and hold the core true and strong at the middle of it, and then also have the ability to change and be flexible within that moment, and to manage to hold both ideas in your head at the same time, that you know what you want it to be, but that when you feel it's not that, you can have the ability to change it. And that's what we did. And yeah, and I was so thrilled that people made that happen, because it's better for it. But it was a big ask.
Okay, so we've got time for one more question, and it's like a real writer's question, because it's about the nuts and bolts of routine, what goes on at our laptops in our spare rooms. It's from William Brown. He wants to know how, for both of you, how do you write? Are you working for a set few hours each day, for example, 9 to 5? Are you writing through the night, at night, first thing in the morning? How does it happen for you?
I never stop. It's like your ears. You know, your ears, you can't, you put your fingers in your ears, possibly you stop listening, but it never stops. You know, you write a piece of paper, you have an idea, you know, it's always on. I mean, you know, you go, you know, I know people go start at 9, finish at 5. And me, I get on and sometimes it's like it's hard as like climbing up a mountain backwards, you know, in sandals or flip-flops. And then you never get anywhere. And all of a sudden, you're lying on the couch thinking of nothing, and it all floods in. It all floods in. So, it's about gathering tales, gathering bits and pieces, and then wow. Sometimes I'm on and I have a stream of consciousness. I'm like, I have it, and I even jump scenes, and I go to, oh no, this is it. Like that, it's just different for everyone, I suppose. But I don't think, if I could give anyone a tip, just don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. And the best time is often when you're sort of like half asleep. A limbo is a good thing in this year. You know, it's cliche, but it's limbo. Limbo is a great thing. Limbo, when you're halfway between anything, it's always a good thing. Planes are very good. Planes are great.
Planes are amazing. Anything in motion, I agree with Steve. Anything in motion helps me a great deal. Trains, I also find really good for thinking and writing.
On the tube.
Yeah, because you can't get Wi-Fi, so you can't get distracted.
I mean, Steve says never stop. Do you ever stop?
Yes, and he's right. Don't, because I stop. I mean, I've stopped now. Well, I'm writing on Succession season 3, but I'm not doing my own project. I'm not doing an individual thing at the moment, and it is really dangerous for that. Like I really struggle with it. I've got to say, when I'm not writing, I find it very difficult to believe I've ever written anything, and that's what I feel at the moment a little bit, is this sense of, how did I do that? Every time I think I can't do it. Every time I think, what happened? How did I do this? It creates a real panic in me, and that's where I am at the moment. Is this feeling of kind of, I don't know how to do this. But the only thing you get better at is recognizing that feeling from before. And I recognize that every time before a project, I felt exactly the same thing, which is, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. And every time I was clearly wrong because I did it. So that's the only thing that I get better at, is just remembering how completely lost I was before as well.
So
we're saying don't stop and embrace the terror. Those seem
it's evidence of the past. I mean, evidence of the past, yeah.
All right, listen, I wish we had another hour, but we don't. We're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Same place tomorrow night is the next event in this series, which is the Director of Factual, which is taking place tomorrow at 7 p.m. UK time. Thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening, to our event supporters, TCL, and thank you, of course, most of all, to Steve McQueen and to Lucy Prebble. Thank you both. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Danny. Nice to see you, Steve.
Bye-bye. Pleasure meeting you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.